Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're stepping right out into the harsh, unforgiving dust of the ancient desert. We're going to dive into this epic narrative of survival. It's this deeply dramatic moment that unfolds right after the Israelites have narrowly escaped slavery in Egypt. They're wandering, they are completely vulnerable, and man, they are about to face a total nightmare they never saw coming. To really get the sheer brutality of what goes down, you gotta listen to this dark reflection from the ancient text. It says, "Remember what Amalek did to you, how he attacked your rear ranks, all the stragglers, when you were tired." You see, the attackers didn't just walk up and engage in an honorable face-to-face battle. No way. They waited until the people were completely and totally exhausted, and then they struck the absolute weakest among them, right from behind. To grasp why this ambush was so devastating, we kind of need to look at the ragged condition of the Israelites right before the attack. Because, let's be real, this journey was definitely no peaceful desert stroll. Just think about what they had barely survived up to this point. First, 3 agonizing days without a single drop of water, leading to the bitter springs of Mara. Then, just a fleeting, brief rest at Elim, followed by a terrifying starvation crisis in the wilderness of Sin, where God literally had to rain down manna just to keep them alive. And finally, they stumble into Rephidim, parched to the point of absolute desperation, arguing with Moses, totally terrified they're gonna die of thirst right there in the sand. The sheer physical and mental exhaustion at this point, it's staggering. And then, boom, a miracle. Moses strikes the rock at Horeb, and water just pours out. I mean, imagine the cinematic, shattered relief of this moment, right? Mothers finally giving water to crying kids, the elderly quenching their thirst. But the source material reveals this chilling pattern. Every grand provision seems to be followed by a brutal test. Because before they can even wipe the water from their chins, the enemy strikes. Now, this sudden, jarring violence brings up a supernatural question. Who exactly were these vicious attackers? Like, who are the Amalekites? And why on earth were they just lurking out in the deep desert, waiting to pounce on a group of weary travelers? Well, here is the tragic twist. This wasn't some random, opportunistic foreign army. The Amalekites were actually descendants of Esau, Jacob's twin brother. Yeah, you heard that right. The attackers were estranged, hostile family members. It really just proves that the absolute worst wars are often family feuds from generations past that just refuse to die, you know? It's this sobering story of how an unresolved grudge way back from the book of Genesis morphed over the years into a full-scale generational bloodbath. And that deep-seated generational hatred, it manifested in literally the most cowardly tactic imaginable. The Amalekites, they didn't have the guts to face Israel's warriors head-on at the front of the line. Instead, they stalked the rear. They actively targeted the stragglers. We're talking the elderly, the sick, the exhausted families with young kids who just couldn't physically keep up with the main march. It was a complete moral obscenity, an attack totally devoid of honor, aimed squarely at the most vulnerable people in the camp. So Moses responds to this sudden crisis by setting up a fascinating 2-front war. Down in the valley, you've got the young, strong commander Joshua fighting this brutal, incredibly physical war with the sword. But at the exact same time, high up on the hill, overlooking all the chaos, you have the aging leader Moses fighting a grueling spiritual war, holding the rod of God. And the catch? The really wild part? Neither theater of war can win without the other. Let's zoom in on that hill for a second. Moses is up there holding up the rod of God. Now, the text is adamant here. This isn't some magic wand casting spells over the battlefield. Not at all. It's a physical, exhausting declaration of dependence. When the rod is held high, Israel dominates and pushes the enemy back. But the second his arms drop, Amalek slaughters them. The visible expression of dependence up on the hill directly dictates the bloody outcome down below. But okay, here's the very human problem. Think about the number 40. Moses was a legend for sure. I mean, he had survived 40 years living as a rugged shepherd in the blistering, unforgiving wilderness of Midian. The guy was resilient. But at the end of the day, he was also flesh and blood. And flesh and blood has absolute, non-negotiable physical limits. Which leads us to one of the most agonizing, slow-motion moments in the whole text. It simply says, "But Moses' hands became heavy." Actually, fun fact, it's the exact same Hebrew root word used to describe Pharaoh's hardened, heavy heart. The battle is raging on, the desert sun is just merciless, his muscles are completely failing, and because of it, his people are actually starting to die in the valley below. This right here is the absolute breaking point. I mean, think about it. Holding your arms up from morning until sunset, that is quite literally beyond human endurance. The spirit is willing. Moses desperately wants to keep that banner raised to save his people, but the flesh simply cannot sustain it. He's an aging, deeply tired man standing in desperate isolation, and he has reached the very end of his own strength. But remember, Moses brought 2 men up that hill with him, Aaron and Hur, and seeing their leader failing, they execute this perfect, seamless rescue maneuver. First, they shove a heavy stone under Moses to give him a solid foundation so he can sit down. Then they flank him on either side, covering his blind spots. And finally, they physically grab his trembling, heavy arms and just hold them up to the sky. They essentially turned an act of deep friendship into a brilliant, tactical battlefield maneuver that saved an entire nation. Now, the text notes that Moses' hands finally remained steady. That word in Hebrew is emunah, which translates to firmness or steadfastness or faithfulness. But don't miss the profound irony and the real lesson here. His hands weren't steady because he was some superhuman who muscled through it all by himself. Not at all. The faithfulness was corporate. It was entirely sustained by his community. When the great leader's individual willpower collapsed, his friends simply refused to let him fall. Because they held him up, those hands stayed steady until the sun finally dipped below the horizon. And as sunset falls, the dust settles on a total, exhausting victory. Down in the valley, Joshua completely defeats Amalek with the edge of the sword, but it's so clear that this was a victory forged exclusively by those combined forces, action in the valley and intercession on the hill, working together in perfect, synchronized harmony. To memorialize this whole ordeal, Moses builds an altar and gives it a very specific name, YHWH Nissi, meaning, "The Lord is my banner." You know, in ancient warfare, a banner was the standard that soldiers rallied around in the absolute chaos of combat. If the banner was up, you knew you were fighting under your king's authority. So this altar acts as the closing scene of the historical narrative, boldly declaring exactly whose power actually won the war that day. But the story doesn't actually end with a peaceful sunset. God makes this startling vow to utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek, declaring a permanent war against them from generation to generation. It's intense. God does not negotiate with this enemy. He does not compromise. The battle at Rephidim might be over, but an ominous truth remains. The war has just begun. And here is where it gets really applicable for us. This ancient, bloody desert ambush, it isn't just history. It's a terrifyingly accurate mirror of our own psychological and spiritual battles today. Think about it. Amalek represents our own inner flesh. The attacked stragglers, those are our most vulnerable moments. Aaron and Hur are the community we desperately need. and the raised rod is the ultimate banner of Christ. Let's look a little closer at the most insidious part of this allegory. See, Amalek acts like a Trojan horse. Just as Amalek shared a bloodline with Israel, your inner struggles share your origin. They are the enemy within. And just like those desert raiders, your darkest struggles don't strike when you're well-rested and feeling strong on a mountaintop. No, they wait until you are exhausted in the valley. They target you when you're isolated. And defeating them? That requires daily, sustained, generational warfare. I really want you to feel the weight of this truth. The enemy looks for the stragglers. If you start to drift to the back of the line, if you become disconnected from your community, if you try to wander this desert completely alone, well, you're placing yourself exactly where the enemy wants you. Isolation is the exact vulnerability that invites the ambush. So, the true lesson of Rephidim isn't just that you need to, quote-unquote, fight harder. It's the terrifying yet beautiful realization that you absolutely cannot win alone. So I'll leave you with this. When the sun is beating down on you, when the battle feels totally endless, and when your hands inevitably grow heavy in the relentless trenches of life, who are your Aaron and Hur? Who is going to pull up a stone and hold your arms up until the victory's won? Think about it.